Now, one of the things that got me started here was that a colleague was Robert MacArthur, who's since deceased, was studying birds and the way in which they responded to differences in vegetation density. And his way of measuring the density of vegetation up in the canopy was to take a huge, long, hollow tube that he had with him for other purposes and hold it up over his eye, look up at the canopy, and guess. And one of the little things that I did was to make a little bit of electronic machinery. The light comes through the camera lens, it reflects off a piece of glass here and goes out so that I can look in here and see what I'm looking at. And then behind that glass is a photocell, and that is hooked up to resistors and the light meter. I developed this for the bird project, but then I simply decided to test it by wandering about in the forest here and taking light meter readings over every little sapling that I found growing in the understory to find out whether I could measure the degree of shade tolerance of different plants and test the old idea that the shade tolerance of the plants tends to increase as the forest succession goes on. That got me started looking at trees here. That got me interested in geometrical patterns in which they lay out their leaves and the effect that that has on shade tolerance and the ability to grow fast in the open and so forth. That was the work for which I became pretty well known fairly quickly, and that was essentially the book that gave me tenure. And so going all the way back to this little machine that I made that measured light for Robert MacArthur's project, I used to refer to that as my tenure machine. Typically, he only appears at parties and usually in some sort of minimalist disguise, and his voice is a little bit different. It goes back to my roots, and I put away my hokey, put on Ivy League accent and talk the way regular people talk. He is the artist who has done most of the works that you see behind me and that grace my office and that have been used in various exhibits and the like. I thought of this as a piece of just sort of minimalist parody with the empty musical staff in the background. But then, as I was finishing it off, I wrote "Song without words or music, inspired by a bird that has flown away." And as soon as I wrote down "has flown away" and looked at the piece in its final form, tears came to my eyes and I began weeping because I would never hear this marvelous song from this marvelous bird that has flown away. So this has ended up being one of my favorite pieces for that reason. Of course, when a tree like this goes down, it's a big tree and it leaves a significant gap in the canopy. That means that now there is a new environment here for trees that had previously been suppressed by the shade of this one to grow up into that gap. Very often in an area that's wet like this, the pit from a wind throw will actually become a temporary pond. There are several species of frogs and toads that depend on those because these ponds that come and go do not get inhabited by fish that would predate the tadpoles. I figured that she would get instant name recognition. Elizabeth Seaport, I know Elizabeth Seaport. I've heard of Elizabeth Seaport. They wouldn't realize where to come from until they saw exit 7B of the New Jersey Turnpike, which is Newark Airport and Elizabeth Seaport. So she was the postmodernist, semi-radical feminist critic, essayist, and poet. I guess my first real obsession in terms of a natural history interest was in birds, and I've had other obsessions since then, particularly trees, butterflies, and I have a budding one for wildflowers that my wife has started. But birds were the real start. That's definitely a hermit thrush. Sure, I love to see a new species. I love to identify a new species and the like, but much more than that, I just like to watch them and see the ways in which they behave. Well, see the beauty of some of them, but not just the colors, but the ways in which they fly, some of them laboriously, some of them with no apparent effort at all. Oh goodness, there goes a great horned owl. Wait, sorry. She has a much more difficult voice to try to keep up for any length of time. She's a medieval historian, and she does a lot of research into the history of some of the things that J. Chester Farnsworth does. Fortunately, we can date this forest from the fact that Anselm himself signed his name here. Whenever I go out in the field, I carry with me one of these little wooden animals. In fact, I always have one in my pocket. And when I come on a tree like this, I'll very often haul out one of my little wooden animals and put it there for scale. The basic idea of the barely integrated curriculum is to use the intrinsic appeal of the Liwa, and especially bear, as icebreakers for introducing children and even teachers to substantive material, strategies, tactics, and insights of natural science, and also as aids to integrating science with the rest of the curriculum. At this point, if the animal doesn't feel good in my hand as I'm sanding it, I'll never make another animal like that again. If it just feels good, I will make a template and then use it to make many more. The latest little silly obsession is for me to keep track of what birds I see every day. And I'm thinking what I would call go-to birds, G-O-T-O, glaringly obvious and totally observable. The list typically runs to only about 25, 28 bird species each day, but I'm lying in wait for the next few migrants to come through. He came about when I found out about Cindy Sherman, a photographer and performance artist who had taken a whole lot of pictures of herself in various regalia. And so Sherman Cindy was naturally the photographer who would take the pictures of all of the other altered egos. There is a whole other thing that we haven't talked about, and I have difficulty talking about it, but our son was paraplegic, and the whole business of diagnosing that and making little bits of equipment to get him walking was something that took up a large part of my, essentially my scientific mind and sort of stalled things for a while in my career. There were some really great successes in it, but because of those successes, because I was able to develop things that the medical community was having a hard time doing, I got into the attitude that I could do that with everything that went wrong. And of course, there were many more failures than there were successes. And the other thing is that it's hard to talk about that because I'm aware of the things that I did, and I don't have our son Eric's viewpoint as well, and so it's hard to know how to balance some of the things that I consider triumphs that are triumphs mainly because he worked with them rather than me. Now officially I'm a full professor emeritus, and of course the emeritus comes from the Latin out of merit, and that's really quite ambiguous as to whether you've run out of merit or whether you're the professor out of your merit, from your merit. Roll the credits.